Dr. Zara Chen pressed her palm against the scanner, watching as layers of quantum encryption dissolved before her clearance. The Galactic Research Station's most secure vault hummed to life, revealing the crystalline core of the Universal Archive, humanity's greatest archaeological discovery. 3 years had passed since the mining crew on Kepler 442b had stumbled upon the buried structure. But Zara still felt her breath catch whenever she entered this chamber. The archive towered before her, a translucent spire that seemed to bend reality around its edges. Xenoarchaeologists had determined it was older than any known civilization, possibly predating the formation of the galaxy itself. More importantly, it contained detailed records of every sentient species that had ever existed, including many that had gone extinct millions of years before the first human ancestors walked upright on Earth. Computer. Resume translation protocol. 77 Alpha. Zara commanded, settling into her workstation. The neural interface hummed as it connected to her cortex, flooding her mind with alien symbols and concepts that her enhanced brain slowly converted into comprehensible data. The section she had been working on for the past 6 months dealt with what the archive called lethal classification protocols. According to the records, the archive's original creators, a species known only as the Architects, had meticulously catalogued every dangerous life form in the galaxy. The classification system was brutally simple. Any species capable of killing a sentient being was marked as lethal. As the translation matrices processed the data, numbers began appearing on Zara's screen that made her stomach clench. The total count of lethal species registered in the archive was staggering, over 40,000 distinct life forms, each entry accompanied by detailed biological specifications, behavioral patterns, and lethality assessments. She scrolled through the endless list, watching as creatures beyond imagination paraded across her display. The void serpents of Andromeda, capable of growing to lengths exceeding Earth's largest whales, while possessing venom that could dissolve molecular bonds. The crystal spiders of the Vega system, whose bodies were composed of living silicon and could shatter starship hulls with their mandibles. The shadow wolves of the Dark Nebula, predators that existed partially outside normal space-time, making them nearly impossible to detect until they struck. Each entry was accompanied by a threat level ranging from Class 1 to Class 10, with detailed explanations of their killing methods, territorial ranges, and historical encounters with various civilizations. The Architects had clearly learned from bitter experience. Many entries contained footnotes, describing the extinction of entire species that had underestimated these predators. What troubled Zara most was the clinical nature of the records. These weren't just scientific observations. They read like warnings compiled by survivors of countless catastrophes. The Architects had clearly devoted enormous resources to documenting these threats, suggesting that lethal wildlife was a galaxy-wide problem that had shaped the development of all intelligent life. As she worked deeper into the database, Zara began noticing patterns in the distribution of lethal species. Certain regions of the galaxy seemed to be absolute death traps, entire sectors where Class 8 and Class 9 predators roamed freely, making colonization impossible for most civilizations. Other areas were relatively safe, containing only lower-class threats that could be managed with proper precautions. The Sol system, according to the archive's maps, fell somewhere in the middle range. Not the most dangerous region, but certainly not the safest either. Zara found this oddly comforting. At least humanity hadn't drawn the worst possible hand in the cosmic lottery. She was about to take a break when something in the data structure caught her attention. There was an anomaly in the classification system, a subcategory she hadn't noticed before. As she investigated further, her blood ran cold. The archive didn't just catalog wild, lethal species. It also tracked domesticated ones. The concept seemed absurd at first. Who would voluntarily domesticate a creature capable of killing sentient beings? But as Zara delved deeper into the records, she began to understand the logic. Many advanced civilizations had indeed tamed lethal species for various purposes: warfare, protection, resource gathering, even companionship. The crystalline collective of the Inner Rim had domesticated the smaller crystal spiders, using them as living tools to carve precise architectural features. The hive worlds had bred docile variants of their planetary predators to serve as guards for their colonies. The warrior culture of Proxima Centauri had managed to tame a species of energy-based predators, turning them into living weapons. But the numbers were small. Even the most successful civilizations had managed to domesticate only a handful of lethal species, typically no more than 10 or 15, over their entire evolutionary history. The process was incredibly dangerous and resource-intensive, requiring generations of careful breeding and genetic manipulation. As Zara compiled the domestication statistics, she noticed something that made her pause. The data was incomplete. There were gaps in the records, sections that seemed to be corrupted or deliberately obscured. But what information remained painted a disturbing picture. According to her preliminary calculations, approximately 39,000 of the 40,000 catalogued lethal species showed some evidence of historical domestication attempts. The vast majority of these efforts had failed catastrophically, often resulting in the extinction of the species that made the attempt. But the sheer scale of the endeavor suggested a civilization of unprecedented ambition or unprecedented recklessness. The more she studied the pattern, the more convinced she became that all these domestication efforts were linked. They weren't random attempts by different civilizations scattered across time and space. They were all connected to a single source, a single species that had somehow managed to tame nearly every lethal creature in the galaxy. But which species could have accomplished such an impossible feat? The archive's records of advanced civilizations were extensive, but none of them came close to this level of biological mastery. The architects themselves, despite their obvious technological superiority, had only managed to domesticate a few dozen lethal species before their civilization mysteriously vanished. Zara spent the next several hours cross-referencing the domestication records with the archive's timeline data. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The domestication events weren't spread randomly across galactic history. They were clustered in a relatively recent period, concentrated in the last 50,000 years of recorded history. Moreover, they seemed to radiate outward from a specific region of the galaxy, following patterns that suggested rapid expansion and colonization. Whatever species had accomplished this feat hadn't done it gradually over millions of years. They had exploded across the galaxy in a relatively short time span, taming lethal predators wherever they went. The implications were staggering. This unknown civilization must have possessed biological and technological capabilities that dwarfed even the architects. They would have needed not just advanced genetic engineering, but also faster-than-light travel, massive industrial capacity, and a level of coordination that suggested a unified galactic government. Yet there was no trace of them in the archive's civilizational records, no mention of their technologies, their culture, their ultimate fate. They had vanished as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only the evidence of their impossible achievement. As Zara prepared to log her findings, she noticed one final detail that sent chills down her spine. The corrupted sections of the archive weren't randomly distributed throughout the database. They were specifically concentrated around the domestication records, as if someone, or something, had deliberately tried to erase all evidence of this mysterious civilization. But why would anyone want to hide such an incredible achievement? The domestication of lethal species should have been celebrated as one of the greatest accomplishments in galactic history. Unless, Zara's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. What if the domestication hadn't been voluntary? What if this mysterious civilization hadn't tamed these predators through careful breeding and genetic manipulation, but through some other means? What if they had somehow enslaved the lethal species, turning the galaxy's most dangerous predators into unwilling servants? The more she thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. A civilization powerful enough to dominate 40,000 lethal species would have been a threat to every other form of intelligent life in the galaxy. Perhaps the other civilizations had banded together to stop them. Perhaps the missing records were evidence of a galactic war, a conflict so devastating that both sides had been wiped from existence. But if that were true, then what had happened to the domesticated species? Had they reverted to their wild state after their masters were destroyed, or were they still out there somewhere, waiting for new commands from masters who would never return? Zara realized she needed help. This discovery was too important and potentially too dangerous for her to handle alone. She began composing a message to Dr. Marcus Webb, the head of the xenobiology department, when her communication console chimed with an incoming priority transmission. The message header made her blood freeze. It was from the Sol System Monitoring Station, and it was marked with the highest possible emergency classification. Dr. Chen, the message began. We need you to return to Earth immediately. We've made a discovery that may be connected to your archive research. We've found evidence that one of the species in the lethal classification database isn't extinct after all. In fact, they're very much alive, and they've been living right under our noses this entire time. Zara stared at the message, her mind struggling to process the implications. If one of the galaxy's lethal species had somehow survived undetected on Earth, the consequences could be catastrophic. Humanity had no experience dealing with truly dangerous alien predators. Their defenses were designed for human-scale threats, not creatures capable of destroying entire civilizations. But there was something else about the message that troubled her even more than the immediate danger. The timestamp showed that it had been sent 3 days ago, but she was only receiving it now. That meant someone or something had been interfering with her communications, keeping her isolated while she made her discoveries about the mysterious civilization. As Zara began shutting down her workstation, preparing for immediate departure, she couldn't shake the feeling that her research had uncovered something that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. The question was whether she would live long enough to find out why. The archive's crystalline surface pulsed with faint light as she gathered her data, almost as if it were trying to communicate with her. For a moment, she could have sworn she heard something, a whisper, a warning, a plea for help. But when she turned to look directly at the structure, it was silent and still, guarding its secrets as it had for millions of years. Whatever forces had shaped the galaxy's history were still at work, and Zara had the unsettling feeling that humanity was about to become part of a story that had been unfolding long before their species had even evolved. The only question was whether they would emerge as heroes, victims, or something else entirely. The journey back to Earth took 18 hours aboard the fastest courier ship in the fleet, but it felt like an eternity to Dr. Zara Chen. She spent the time reviewing her archive data, cross-referencing it with Earth's biological databases, trying to identify which lethal species might be hiding on humanity's homeworld. The possibilities were terrifying. Any creature classified above Class 5 would be virtually unstoppable with current human technology. As the ship dropped out of hyperspace and Earth's familiar blue marble filled the view screen, Zara felt a complex mix of emotions. Home had never looked more beautiful, but knowing that some galaxy-class predator might be lurking somewhere on its surface made every familiar landmark seem sinister. Dr. Marcus Webb met her at the orbital station, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled excitement and fear. His graying hair was disheveled, and the dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept in days. "Thank God you're here," he said, gripping her shoulder. "We need to get to the surface immediately. The situation is evolving faster than we can track it." During the shuttle descent, Webb briefed her on the discovery that had prompted her emergency recall. A routine genetic survey of Earth's biosphere had uncovered something impossible. DNA sequences that matched entries in the Galactic Archive's biological database. Not similar sequences, exact matches, down to the molecular level. "At first we thought it was contamination," Webb explained as they passed through the atmosphere. "Maybe samples from your research had somehow gotten mixed into our databases. But then we ran independent analyses, using completely separate equipment, and the results were consistent." The shuttle landed at the Geneva Research Complex, where humanity's most advanced biological laboratories were housed. As they walked through the corridors, Zara noticed the increased security armed guards at every checkpoint, biometric scanners that she'd never seen before, and a general atmosphere of tension that made her skin crawl. The main laboratory was a hive of activity, with dozens of researchers hunched over displays showing complex genetic data. Dr. Sarah Kim, the chief geneticist, looked up as they entered, her expression grim. "We've confirmed matches for over 300 species so far," she announced without preamble. "Everything from Class 2 minor predators to Class 7 apex killers. The genetic signatures are embedded throughout Earth's entire ecosystem." Zara studied the data streams flowing across the wall displays. The implications were staggering. If hundreds of lethal species had genetic markers present on Earth, It meant they had all been here at some point in history. But that was impossible. Earth's fossil record showed no evidence of any of these creatures. "Show her the domestication markers," Webb said quietly. Kim pulled up a new set of displays, this time showing detailed genetic analyses of specific sequences. What Zara saw made her sit down heavily in the nearest chair. The DNA didn't just match the archive's records of lethal species, it matched the domesticated variants. Every single genetic signature showed the telltale modifications that indicated selective breeding, genetic manipulation, and behavioral conditioning. These weren't wild predators that had somehow reached Earth. They were the carefully crafted creations of the mysterious civilization she had been studying in the archive. "How is this possible?" Zara whispered. "Earth's evolutionary history is well documented. We know where every major species came from. There's no room in the timeline for an invasion of domesticated alien predators." Kim exchanged a meaningful look with Webb before answering. "That's what we thought too, until we started looking at the distribution patterns. The genetic markers aren't randomly scattered throughout the ecosystem, they're concentrated in specific species that have been closely associated with human development." She pulled up a new display showing a timeline of human civilization alongside genetic frequency charts. The correlation was unmistakable. The species with the highest concentrations of lethal genetic markers were all animals that humans had domesticated or lived alongside for thousands of years. "Wolves," Kim continued, highlighting specific data points. "Genetic markers for Fenris stalkers class, six-pack hunters from the Outer Rim. Horses carry signatures from war beasts of the Coalition worlds. Even domestic cats show traces of Shadow Lynx DNA Class 5 stealth predators that can phase partially out of normal space." Zara stared at the data, her mind reeling. "You're saying that Earth's domestic animals are actually alien predators?" "Not exactly," Webb interjected. "The percentages are small, usually less than 5% of the total genome. It's more like these alien species were used as genetic templates to enhance Earth's native animals. Someone took wolves and made them stronger, faster, more intelligent by incorporating DNA from galactic predators." The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. The mysterious civilization from the archive hadn't just domesticated lethal species from across the galaxy, they had brought them to Earth and integrated them with the planet's native wildlife. "But why? And when?" "We need to see the timeline data," she said urgently. "If we can determine when these genetic modifications occurred, we might be able to figure out who was responsible." Kim led them to a specialized dating laboratory, where samples of ancient DNA were being analyzed using quantum carbon dating techniques. The results were displayed on a massive holographic timeline that showed the introduction of alien genetic markers across Earth's history. What they revealed defied everything Zara thought she knew about human development. The oldest markers dated back nearly 50,000 years, coinciding exactly with the emergence of anatomically modern humans. More disturbing still, the frequency and sophistication of the genetic modifications increased in direct correlation with human technological and cultural advancement. "Look at this," Kim said, pointing to a cluster of data points around 10,000 BCE. "This corresponds with the development of agriculture. Suddenly we see a massive spike in domestication-related genetic markers, not just in traditional farm animals but in dozens of species that humans had never successfully domesticated before." The pattern continued throughout human history. Each major leap in human development, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Industrial Revolution, was accompanied by corresponding increases in the sophistication of genetic modifications in Earth's wildlife. "It's as if someone was deliberately guiding human development," Webb murmured. "Using genetically enhanced animals to help humanity advance through each stage of civilization." But Zara was focused on something else, a detail that sent chills down her spine. According to the archive's timeline, the mysterious civilization had vanished approximately 40,000 years ago, yet the genetic modifications on Earth continued for another 30,000 years, right up until the present day. "This doesn't make sense," she said, pointing to the most recent data points. "If the civilization that created these domesticated species went extinct 40,000 years ago, who continued the genetic modification program?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. If the genetic modifications had continued after the fall of the original civilization, it meant someone else had taken over the program, someone who had access to the same advanced genetic engineering techniques and comprehensive knowledge of galactic lethal species. Kim pulled up another set of displays. These, showing the geographical distribution of genetic markers across Earth. The patterns were revealing the highest concentrations were found in regions where human civilization had flourished earliest and most successfully. Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, the Yellow River Basin, the Nile Delta, she enumerated. All the cradles of human civilization show maximum genetic modification density. It's as if whoever was running this program was specifically focused on helping humanity succeed. Zara felt pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to click together in her mind. The archive's missing records, the 40,000 lethal species, the mysterious civilization that had vanished without a trace, and now Earth's genetically modified biosphere that seemed designed to support human development. "We need to check something," she said urgently. "The archive contains genetic templates for the original, unmodified versions of all these lethal species. If we compare them to Earth's current animals," Kim was already ahead of her, pulling up comparative genetic analyses between archive templates and Earth species. What they revealed was beyond anything they had imagined. The match wasn't just close, it was perfect. Earth's domestic animals weren't enhanced versions of native species. They were the genetically modified descendants of lethal alien predators, carefully bred and adapted to be compatible with Earth's ecosystem and helpful to human development. Dogs weren't evolved wolves, they were domesticated, Fenris stalkers whose aggression had been suppressed and loyalty enhanced. Horses weren't native ungulates, they were war beasts, modified for transportation rather than combat. Cats were shadow lynx variants bred for pest control instead of assassination. "Dear God," Webb whispered. "Humanity didn't domesticate Earth's animals. Someone domesticated galactic predators and gave them to us." The revelation was staggering. For 50,000 years, humanity had been living alongside creatures descended from some of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, never knowing that their faithful companions were actually alien killing machines bred for docility. But who had done this? Who had possessed the knowledge and resources to orchestrate such a massive biological intervention? And why had they chosen humanity as the recipients of this incredible gift? Zara was about to voice these questions when alarms began blaring throughout the laboratory. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and automated systems began sealing blast doors and activating containment protocols. "What's happening?" she shouted over the noise. Kim was frantically working at her console, her face pale with terror. "It's the genetic markers," she called back. "They're not dormant anymore. Something is activating them." On the displays around them, real-time genetic monitoring data from research facilities worldwide began streaming in. The alien DNA sequences that had lain dormant in Earth's animals for millennia were suddenly expressing themselves. Domestic animals across the globe were beginning to revert to their original forms. Reports flooded in from major cities, dogs growing to the size of horses, their eyes beginning to glow with predatory intelligence. Cats phasing in and out of visibility as their shadow lynx heritage asserted itself. Horses developing armored hide and neural combat interfaces that their ancestors had used for interstellar warfare. "It's happening everywhere," Webb reported, his voice barely audible over the continuing alarms. "London, Tokyo, New York, Sydney. Every major population center is reporting the same phenomenon." Zara watched the incoming data with growing horror. Humanity had spent 50,000 years developing alongside what they thought were helpful companions. Instead, they had been living with dormant weapons, sleeping predators that someone could apparently activate at will. "Who's doing this?" she demanded. "Who has the ability to trigger genetic changes in animals across the entire planet simultaneously?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The archive data she had brought back from the research station began displaying new information, sequences that hadn't been visible before, as if her return to Earth had somehow activated previously hidden files. What she read there made her blood run cold. The mysterious civilization that had domesticated 40,000 lethal species wasn't extinct. They had never left at all. They had been here on Earth all along, hidden in plain sight, guiding humanity's development for 50 millennia. And according to the newly revealed archive records, they were about to reveal themselves to their carefully cultivated protégés. The genetic activation wasn't an attack, it was a summons. After 50,000 years of preparation, humanity was finally ready to take its place in the galactic community, ready to meet the species that had shaped their entire evolutionary history from the shadows, ready to learn that they weren't Earth's first intelligent species after all. Dr. Zara Chen stood in the observation deck of the Geneva Research Complex, watching the city transform before her eyes. What had begun 12 hours earlier as a biological emergency was revealing itself to be something far more extraordinary. The reversion process wasn't chaotic, it was coordinated, purposeful, and somehow familiar. Below, a pack of what had once been German shepherds moved through the streets with predatory grace that no earth-born canine had ever possessed. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of intelligence far beyond animal cunning, yet they showed no aggression toward the humans who watched them with mixture of terror and wonder. Dr. Marcus Webb joined her at the window, his tablet displaying global monitoring data. "The pattern is consistent worldwide," he reported. "Whatever's triggering the genetic activation is doing so in waves, moving from east to west, following the sunrise. It's as if something is using Earth's rotation to synchronize the process." The newly revealed archive data had provided partial answers, but each revelation only deepened the mystery. The civilization that had shaped Earth's biosphere called themselves the Shepherds, and according to the records, they had been present on Earth for over 200,000 years, long before modern humans had even evolved. "Look at this," Dr. Sarah Kim called from her workstation. She had been analyzing the latest archive downloads, trying to piece together the Shepherd's history. The genetic modifications weren't just about creating useful animals for humans. They were about preserving the lethal species themselves. Zara moved to examine Kim's data. The pattern was becoming clearer with each new piece of information. The Shepherds hadn't just domesticated 40,000 lethal species, they had saved them from extinction. According to the archive's deepest records, the galaxy had once been dominated by a different kind of civilization, one that viewed lethal wildlife as an impediment to expansion. The Purifiers, as they called themselves, had systematically exterminated dangerous species wherever they encountered them, sterilizing entire worlds to make them safe for colonization. The Shepherds had been the galaxy's response to this ecological genocide, a coalition of species that believed the universe's biodiversity was worth preserving, even if it meant taking tremendous risks. They had rescued lethal species from purifier extermination, bringing them to hidden sanctuaries where they could be studied, understood, and eventually integrated into stable ecosystems. Earth wasn't their first sanctuary world, Kim continued, highlighting star maps that showed the Shepherds' network of operations. They had dozens of them scattered across the galaxy. But Earth was special, it was their final stronghold, the place where they made their last stand against the Purifiers. The war between the Shepherds and Purifiers had raged for millions of years, fought on a scale that dwarfed anything in recorded galactic history. Entire star systems had been destroyed, civilizations had been wiped from existence, and ultimately both sides had exhausted themselves in mutual annihilation. But the Shepherds had won a final, crucial victory. In the last days of the war, they had managed to hide Earth so completely that the Purifiers had never found it. Using technology beyond current human understanding, they had cloaked the entire solar system, making it invisible to any scanning method the Purifiers possessed. That's why there's no record of Earth in any galactic database, Webb realized. We've been hidden for 200,000 years. The genetic activation wasn't just affecting domestic animals. Reports were coming in from wildlife preserves and zoos around the world. Creatures that had seemed perfectly normal were revealing heritage that dated back to the other side of the galaxy. Lions carried the genetic signature of pride stalkers from the Centauri cluster. Elephants showed modifications based on siege beasts that had once trampled the crystalline cities of the inner worlds. Even more shocking were the discoveries about human evolution itself. The genetic analysis equipment that had been designed to study animal DNA was now turning its attention to human samples. And what it revealed challenged everything humanity thought they knew about their own origins. "We're not entirely human," Kim announced, her voice barely steady. "At least, not in the way we've always understood it." The human genome contained the same types of subtle modifications found in Earth's animals, but they were far more sophisticated. Instead of incorporating DNA from single lethal species, human genetics showed influence from dozens of different galactic civilizations, not predators, but the intelligence and technological capabilities of species that had been allies of the shepherds. "We're hybrids," Zara breathed, staring at the genetic analysis. The shepherds didn't just preserve lethal animals on Earth. They created a new species by combining the best traits from across the galaxy. Humans possess the problem-solving abilities of the architect engineers, the spatial reasoning of the void navigators, the pattern recognition capabilities of the quantum mathematicians, and the social cooperation instincts of the hive coordinators. Traits that had been carefully selected and integrated over thousands of generations to create a species capable of both surviving on a sanctuary world filled with deadly predators and eventually taking over the shepherds' Ponce mission. The activation process was accelerating. Around the world, the transformed animals were beginning to exhibit behaviors that suggested they were receiving instructions from some external source. They gathered in specific locations, formed organized groups, and waited with the patience of creatures that knew their purpose. At 3:47 p.m. local time, the source of those instructions finally revealed itself. The sky above Geneva began to shimmer, and slowly, impossibly, massive structures became visible as sophisticated cloaking systems deactivated for the first time in millennia. Ships, or perhaps cities that dwarfed anything in human imagination, hung motionless in the atmosphere, their surfaces gleaming with technologies that seemed to bend light and space around them. Similar revelations were occurring worldwide. The Shepherd's hidden infrastructure was emerging from 200,000 years of concealment, and the scale of it was breathtaking. Orbital stations, underwater cities, vast underground complexes that had existed beneath major population centers without humanity ever suspecting their presence. "They've been here all along," Webb murmured, watching as smaller craft detached from the massive vessels and began descending toward the research complex. "Living among us, guiding us, protecting us." The archive data stream suddenly intensified, providing real-time translations as the shepherds finally broke their ancient silence. The message that appeared on every connected device across Earth was simple, profound, and terrifying in its implications. "Children of Terra," the message began. "The time of hiding has ended. The purifiers have returned to this galaxy, and their new empire spans 1,000 worlds. They have learned from their ancient defeat and developed weapons that can penetrate our concealment technologies. Earth will be discovered within solar months." Zara felt her heart stop. After 200,000 years of safety, humanity's sanctuary was about to be exposed to the very forces that had driven the shepherds into hiding. "But you are not the helpless primitives we once protected," the message continued. "You are our greatest creation, bred from the finest genetic heritage the galaxy has ever produced. You carry within you the accumulated wisdom and capabilities of 100 extinct civilizations. And you are not alone." The transformed animals across Earth began to move with coordinated purpose. Dogs, cats, horses, and countless other species started making their way toward transportation hubs, their movements guided by instincts that had lain dormant for millennia. They were preparing for something, a mobilization on a scale that suggested warfare. "The lethal species you have lived alongside are more than companions," the message revealed. "They are your partners in a mission that has waited 200 millennia to begin. Together, you will carry our work to the stars. You will establish new sanctuary worlds, preserve endangered species, and build the greatest biological preserve the universe has ever known." The first Shepherd craft settled onto the landing pad outside the research complex. And through its transparent hull, Zara could see figures that were both alien and strangely familiar. Tall, graceful beings whose features seemed to combine elements from dozens of different species, the ultimate expression of the same genetic synthesis that had created humanity. "But first," the message concluded, "you must learn to use the gifts we have given you. Your animals must remember their true nature. They work to, and you must awaken the technologies that have slept in your genetic code for 1,000 generations. The purifiers are coming, and when they arrive, they will find not defenseless prey, but the guardians of 40,000 lethal species, ready to defend their sanctuary. As the shepherd representatives approached the building, Zara felt something stirring within her own DNA knowledge that had been waiting to emerge. Capabilities that had been carefully preserved across countless generations. Around the world, other humans were experiencing the same awakening, their enhanced genetics finally expressing the full range of abilities their creators had intended. The truth was overwhelming in its scope. Humanity hadn't just been protected by advanced aliens, they had been created by them as the ultimate guardians of galactic biodiversity. Every domestic animal, every wildlife preserve, every ecosystem on Earth was part of a vast biological arc that contained the genetic heritage of an entire galaxy. And now, with the purifiers returning to threaten that heritage once again, humanity was about to discover just how dangerous they could be when their true nature was finally unleashed. The 40,000 lethal species recorded in the Galactic Archive hadn't been conquered or domesticated in the traditional sense. They had been recruited, preserved, and prepared for the day when they would be needed again. That day had arrived, and Earth's seemingly peaceful sanctuary was about to transform into the galaxy's most formidable military force. As Zara prepared to meet the beings who had shaped her species' entire evolutionary history, she realized that humanity's greatest adventure wasn't about exploring the stars, it was about defending them. The children of Terra were about to inherit the galaxy's most dangerous and important responsibility, and they would face it with the combined might of every lethal predator that had ever drawn breath. The age of hiding was over. The age of the Guardians had begun. Outside, a house cat phased partially out of reality and back again, its shadow lynx heritage finally free to express itself. Its eyes met Zara's through the window, and in that moment, she saw not a pet, but a weapon of incredible sophistication, ready to serve in a war that would determine the fate of biological diversity across the entire universe. The Galactic Archive had recorded 40,000 lethal species, and humans had once domesticated 39,000 of them. But they hadn't domesticated them at all. They had been created to be their partners, their allies, and their friends in the greatest mission any species had ever undertaken. Now it was time to find out just how lethal that partnership could be.